Tonight, our main speaker is Sally. Please help me welcome Sally to the stage.
Okay. I have to sit on the edge of the table. I'm in acceptance about that because I can't stand a long time. My name is Sally, and I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic. I got sober in 2011, so as you can see, I wasn't a youngster like a lot of you guys. I spent a lifetime living quiet desperation. I wasn't a, lying in the gutter drunk. I was someone that, through my honed skills of adapting, became very codependent, became perfectionistic. I always had to be the best, and I always had to shine, and the pressure was always there, and if I wasn't the best, then it was like total catastrophe. And this is coming from a background of being born into a family where I had a raging, angry, alcoholic father, which seems to be very common among us. And he was violent, and the worst thing wasn't even the pain, the physical pain, but the emotional abuse of being told, you're not good enough, and what's wrong with you, and why do you think you're so special? And but the cool thing is, I remember as a young child being so happy, joyous, and free. I remember waking up every day and being full of wonder and full of excitement and thinking life is so cool and what am I going to do today? And I think that's my natural state, and I believe that that's what I'm recovering. I'm recovering from alcohol, but that that was just the tip of the iceberg. That was just my entry to get into this phenomenal fellowship. Because I think we've been gifted with a program where we are taught how to live. For whatever reason, how many of us feel like, what's wrong with me? I never got the book on how to live. And imagine, many of you are very young, which I applaud you for being here. And I admire the fact that we now have treatment that deals with so many of the underlying trauma and abuse and neglect issues, because there are well-known people in the field of recovery who really believe that's the underpinnings of our addictions. And I truly believe that as well. Not that there aren't other ones, but so I just think that, we're all miracles, and to find our way into the finest thing on the planet is nothing short of amazing. So like many young, confused people, of course I thought I'll go into a helping profession. If I can't fix me, I'll fix the world. What makes it also so scary and complicated is that we are doing all the things we do unconsciously. The perfectionism, the people-pleasing, the caretaking, the being a victim, the blaming. It's just like there's no awareness that we're doing this, like a little ball in a pinball machine just going bang, 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 living in reactivity. And that's why I'm just so grateful that we have programs now for recovery, and people are staying longer and longer, a year, 2 years. It gives you the best shot at uncovering some of the things underneath of all of our, our addictions and our dysfunctional ways of being in the world and our unhappiness. For me, shame started at a very young age. I think the teen years, you start to feel the pressure and want to fit in and want to be like everybody else. And that's when, I really felt that alcohol made me feel really comfortable. And I was just so fun and cool when I did alcohol. And my grandfather was a doctor. And so in my house, we always had Seconal in the cabinet. Anybody know what Seconal is? They're nice little red pills. So as a child, I could just help myself. And there was a lot of laxity back in those days where there wasn't a lot of oversight about these things, So anyway, my father also took a thing called Dexamil, which they don't have anymore, which is Dexedrine and Miltown, which is a very nice combination. And so I would take some of those sometimes. They go very nicely with alcohol. And this is how I navigated, through some of my most painful times. So I got through my teenage years, and by then, having had no interventions or no help for my anxiety, for my depression, for feelings of not being good enough, in my early 20s, I just had to drop out of college. I just couldn't hack it. I was a hippie, just free love and all that, and it was fun. Did some tripping. When I smoked pot, I turned into a vegetable. I think otherwise I would be a major pothead, but I couldn't put two words together. Whereas I had a brother that could smoke pot and be completely lucid and articulate. I was like, dang. But I'm kind of glad. I'm kind of glad I had asthma, or else I would be a chronic smoker too. So I was spared of a few things. So got married because I got pregnant. I have a son who's going to be 45 this month. And, it's not the greatest thing in the world to have a child that way. We struggled through a few years. When I would get upset, I would go out and drive around for hours in the car and drink a 6-pack of beer and turn the radio up. And it's a miracle that I never got into trouble. It's an absolute miracle. So got divorced after a few years. Meanwhile, something in me said, you need to figure out what to do with yourself, because the guy I was married to wasn't really going to do much. He was not into working or, taking care of the family. So I went to nursing school. Like I was saying, there's nothing better if you're codependent than to find a job where you can be more codependent, right? And I'm not knocking it. I think sometimes in the helping fields, we get accused of being codependent when we're just being caring, because we're like overcompensating for people being codependent. So I think that's a shame that we kind of brand everybody who's a caring person sometimes. But that is a real real problem for people that are in the helping fields, because there's nothing worse than the unhealed healer. So I have more to say about that. I said my career. No, I actually turned into a licensed therapist at one point. So went to nursing school, got divorced, met my second husband. I love nursing. I was a good nurse. One of the cool things about being a nurse in the 1980s, they didn't lock up any of the medications. The only thing that was locked up was like the Demerol, the morphine, but the Percocet, the other stuff, the Valium, was all just right there in the patient's drawers. So, I didn't take a lot. I tell you, I don't know why, but I've never needed a lot of anything. Doesn't take much. So I didn't take a lot, but from time to time, I would take a little here, take a little there, because it wasn't unusual for the drawers to be short, and we have to call the pharmacy to bring some more of this up, and it wasn't so rampant, I guess, I don't know. But I was just excruciatingly uncomfortable in my own skin, and always feeling, no matter what I did, that it wasn't enough, and that other people were better, and why, but nobody knew that I felt that way, because I was so good at putting on my facade, and using my medications and my alcohol to prop myself up. I would anticipate stressful situations and have those things, Being a nurse, I knew how to get prescriptions for Valium or whatever I wanted, and so I don't think that I really abused them, but to not be able to live life without these crutches. And I'm sure that I wasn't the best person I could be, the way I was coping and navigating my life. Just give you a quick example. When my kids were teenagers, the last two, they're 32 and 30, I thought it was a good idea about 15 years ago to take them to Mexico with their girlfriend and boyfriend and do drugs and alcohol. I thought that was really a bonding experience. So I even said that I'm like an anthropologist. I'm going to study these teenagers in the wild, and it was fun in a way. I have to say it was fun, but I'm sorry. that's the kind of example I was as a parent. I just thought other people were straight-laced and boring, and, who wants to be like that? So, fortunately, 2 of my 3 kids don't even do alcohol or drugs. Not to say they didn't put me through it. The 32-year-old, we spent about $30,000 keeping him out of prison when he was selling narcotics in this town. And I told him, if you were anybody else's kid, I'd say lock him up and throw away the key. But to his credit, he turned his life around completely. And 10 years later, he's a really solid citizen. He doesn't drink, he doesn't use drugs. And the same with my daughter. She did a lot of fooling around with, not the major stuff, but it was her boyfriend that was major marijuana dealers with my son. And the boyfriend got caught. And he spent 8 years in prison. And he just got out a year ago. And thank God he seems to be okay. My daughter narrowly escaped it because I told her when I didn't know my son was involved, but I knew her boyfriend was dealing. I said, you better move out because you're going to go down soon. And 2 weeks later, he was arrested. So we've had our share of scrapes, and that's only a few of them. But I'm so grateful. My oldest son married someone, not married, he got together, made 2 kids with somebody who's an addict, an alcoholic, and who has gone in and out and gone to the lowest levels of depravity and seems to be at this point okay. I gave her up for dead a couple years ago. She was living on the street, prostitute and shooting up drugs, and she just looked terrible. And all I could do is pray for her. So I have a son that's got the 2 kids who he abuses alcohol. I don't know. I think he still smokes pot every day. And, but for the grace of God, that's where I would be. But it's at some point, I hope that, he will get the message that there is a better way and you don't have to, limp along, because he is the total package of insecurity and lack of self-esteem and poor me, and it's sad, and I just love him the way he is. So I'm glad that I can be the kind of grandma that I'd like to be for my grandchildren, that I couldn't be for him. He got the brunt of it because I had him when I was very young and I wasn't ready to be a mom. So as I was saying, I went to nursing school. As luck would have it, I injured myself severely lifting a patient. And it's like Michelle was saying, I don't ever see anything as bad. Now, that wasn't always the case. Looking back, that was a really good thing that happened to me because I had to stop working as a medical nurse overnight. And I remember watching those shows. There was one that went off the air, St. Elsewhere, and I would lie in bed and cry and think, I'm not a real nurse anymore. What am I going to do? And I went to my first job interview for psychiatric nurse because you don't have to lift people. So, and you know how I sold myself. Back in those days, you had to have some experience to get a job. I never figured out how that worked because how did you have experience if you had to have experience to get a job? But I basically told the hiring nurse manager that my whole family's crazy. I have lots of experience. My father's an alcoholic. My sister has borderline personality, my whole family. And, they hired me, and I was the only one on the whole unit. It was a locked unit for teenagers. And I was the only one working on that unit that was not a declared alcoholic addict. And boy, was I green. Oh, my gosh. And I'm really surprised they hired me. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot in that job. And as I progressed, I worked in other areas of mental health. And that's another example. I was having children because by then I was in my mid and late 30s. And so if we were going to do it, we were going to have to do it. So we had a couple kids. And so I was working part-time doing like float pool. And so I would just be here for a few days, here for a few days, here. And then because of my negative thinking about myself, I think, well, you're just a jack of all trades and master of none, working in all these different places, and you're not really working with a team on one unit. as it turned out later, that would be a huge gift, because eventually I went back to school, got my master's degree, became a licensed therapist, and instead of practicing therapy, I was working at West Yavapai Guidance Clinic with the children in outpatient. And the teacher of the psychiatric nursing at Yavapai College asked me if she could send students there. And I said, sure. And so she did, and I thought it was great fun. And she said, well, I'm retiring. Why don't you, in a year or so, why don't you take my job? I mean, the thought of taking her job, it was like, are you kidding me? It's like, go ahead, ask me to be the President of the United States. No way. I had a terrible, terrible fear of speaking, and I got the job. For some, talk about God shots, I pulled some stuff out of my, for my interview that I don't know where it came from. And I was hired, and I had 12 fantastic years teaching psychiatric nursing at Yavapai College. And it's hard to believe that it never occurred to me. My students went to clinicals in a lot of recovery homes and eating disorders, inpatient psychiatry. I had 12 clinicals. And it never occurred to me that I had a problem. Never. I'd be taking my medicine so I could get up and speak to my class, so that I could do this, so I could do that, drinking alcohol. And I remember thinking, when the weekend would come, it's so great when the weekend gets here because I get some relief. It's like the great pretender. And my facade was so great that to this day. And also I was able to perform pretty well. Go figure it. I wonder what I would have been like if I'd been all of me. But I did get to find out, because at one point, after 29 years of marriage, and I was teaching for a few years, I know I had to leave my husband. We were not compatible, and basically what I knew is that I had to finish growing up. Although I didn't know it consciously, I just knew that was another addiction. That was probably my main addiction. That I didn't think that I was a whole person without this guy in my life. And that was way harder than giving up alcohol. And I just said, I'm going to go on my own, and I'm going to see what happens. And I did. Fortunately, I was able to get my own house, and I just said, I'm biting the bullet. If I got to cry all day when I get home from work, that's fine. That was the greatest thing I ever did for myself, to say, whatever it takes, I'm going to face my fear, and I'm going to walk through it, and I'm getting to the other side. And around that same time, I met somebody, and about a year after I left my husband, something like that, a friend of mine, who I found out later had 25 years of sobriety, she said, I think you're an alcoholic. I was like, what? God. I mean, I don't think I ever drank more than one bottle of wine. I just drink and I go to sleep, But she knew. I didn't have blackouts. I didn't have hangovers, except for being foggy and tired, and not being as clear as I wanted to be. But there's pills for that. I always had pills to get me going again, so it wasn't really a problem. Except I do have atrial fibrillation, which I think is probably from some of the things I've done to my body, expecting more than it was supposed to be able to give. So, I lost my train of thought. That's easy to do. Yeah, so I was, in this job where I was doing a good job, but it wasn't all of me. And I moved out, and I lived on my own. And this woman said to me, I think you're an alcoholic. And I thought, at this point, I wasn't really suicidal, but I felt like I was just limping through life. Like, all I have to do is hang on, and I'll be out of here in 30 years. That's how I was looking at it. And nobody knew. Nobody knew. And she said, I think you're an alcoholic. And I said, what? So it never occurred to me. My brother died a year and a half ago. He was an active alcoholic, and he had a very subpar life for what he was capable of. The woman that I adore, who's still a friend of mine, left him when he was 40 because she couldn't take it. And she was the love of his life, and he never got over it. So those are some of the, wreckages that we see around us. And for the grace of God, that didn't happen to me. So I said, well, I'm a very busy person. I'm a professional person with an important job, and I don't know about this. And she said, well, just try it. She said, try it for 6 months. I said, well, I'll try it for 90 days. Because I knew that I didn't want to say I'll do it and not do it. I thought I can do anything for 3 months. So here's the good part. It was this room. I walked into this room, and I knew immediately that I was home. And I knew immediately that I found my people. And to this day, it doesn't make any sense to me. This hodgepodge group of people of all ages, all, kinds of professions, all walks of life. Yet somebody said today that half the people in AA have been in prison. And for me, it's like, so what? Some of my best friends have been in prison. And I just love that I came in here and I found real people. And what I found is that I was wrapped with layers and layers and layers and layers of anxiety and low self-esteem and feelings of inadequacy. And just to back up a little, being in the field that I was in, I had access to every kind of therapy. I also had enough money to try every kind of alternative therapy you can think of. I was also into yoga and meditation since I was 19. I studied every religion of the world. I meditated. None of these things brought me back to sanity and gave me a life worth living. And I believe the ticket, like I said, was putting down the alcohol and drugs and finding that higher power that is me. I am it. It lives in me. My higher power is my higher self. It's part of the greater whole, the source that created me. And this is just my opinion, and every one of us. But actually, it's not just my opinion. I'll talk a little more about quantum physics in a minute. What we know now that we used to think was woo-woo. So, I still get choked up. I still get excited when I go to meetings. I told this woman, well, I'll go to 3 meetings a week. That's all I can manage. And I slowly realized that I was trying to find time for the meetings. It wasn't that long, maybe 6 months, I don't know, before it was like my whole life was meetings, and when can I fit the work in? This became my life, and that hasn't changed. It hasn't changed in 8 years, and it's like where I belong. So one of the cool things that happened is that for the last 4 years of my teaching, I did not have any alcohol or drugs. And it's so cool to find out that you are who you wanted to be and who you thought you were in the first place. Because I just didn't think I was. I thought, well, I can do this because I'm taking drugs and alcohol and this and that. And that's why I can say smart things and interesting things. And lo and behold, I was even smarter and more interesting when I stopped. It doesn't mean I don't get nervous, I do get nervous. I'm still human, and I do get self-conscious sometimes. But that great hole that was there of feeling something's wrong with me, how come everybody else got the book and I didn't? Well, I got the book now. And it's so amazing to me, what we get back in recovery. Because even though I didn't appear to have lost a lot, my husband, we've now been married almost 40 years. We started spending time together, and he knew that I was going to be different, and it had to be different. And to his credit, he wanted the same things I did. I'm going to drop a name of 2 things that really helped him: the Mankind Project and Boys to Men. Those are some awesome organizations. I know we're not supposed to promote, but they're some wonderful organizations in our town that it helps the men as much as it helps the boys, that Boys to Men. So he's been actively involved in that for years, and that's where he kind of got his therapy in the Mankind Project group, because they hold each other accountable just like we do. It's not a hierarchy. It's just a lot of, good techniques to uncover our woundedness. What happened. So the way I look at the steps, number one, I'm powerless over everything. When I work with people, when I work with women in recovery, first of all, there's no pure alcoholics anymore. One of my desires is to see AA upshift a little to be more inclusive and still honor the old traditions, because I have hardly met anybody that doesn't have multiple addictions, including sex and love, money, gambling, you name it. So that's just my own personal desire to be more inclusive. Powerless over everything. And so when I start working with somebody, that's the first thing I want to make sure we all know is I haven't got power over anything. And that's why I love the Serenity Prayer, because we accept that we don't have that power, but if we do the right things, we can get connected to it. So step 2, came to believe. And that was easy for me. I always believed in a higher power. I always believed in a benevolent universe that if you did the right things, good things would happen. And I still believe that. And then step 3 is where, the rubber hits the road. You put down the pills and you face life. And, it's not always easy. There's times where I was uncomfortable in my first 2 or 3 years, like if I went out dancing or went to a party. And my sponsor said, always have something to drink, like soda water with lime, And there were little tricks that I had to always, or, bring your own car to a party so you can leave if you want to leave. I've heard so many people give their suggestions at meetings on how to handle being sober in an alcoholic world. And what I love about AA, the main thing I believe in since I came here is to thine own self be true. And it's kind of a paradox, because the first one we're told is you're a bunch of selfish, self-centered alcoholics, and and I never learned how to take care of myself and how to love myself. So we have to put together the two sides of that paradox and learn how to live with it. And like I said, little by little, the layers just dropped. And the only way that they dropped is that I felt so loved and accepted in these rooms that I could relax, that I could breathe, that I could take a risk to be real and be myself. And it's like, I surprised myself. It's like, I didn't know I was still in there. That little girl, Sally, that used to wake up every day happy, joyous, and free came back. Little by little, and everything has been restored to me. My husband and I reunited. We got back together 3 years ago. I spent 7 years on my own to get the hang of being a grown-up at an advanced age. So kudos to everybody who's going to get the hang of it before they're old. But it's never too late. We have a friend that's 85 that's got 10 years of sobriety, and he's cool as hell, and he's a doctor. And some of you may remember Dr. Don, who was working as the head doctor in recovery in Phoenix. And finally his colleague said, Don, you're an alcoholic, and you got to get your shit together, or you can't be the director anymore. So there's many casualties among us. And what I always taught my students, because not only are they going to go out and help people as nurses, because you use psychiatry in every area, I would tell my students things like, why don't you try being present for your patient? Things like that just get pushed to the side because they're thinking about IVs and catheters and this. It's like there's a person in there. And I also wanted my students to know how to protect themselves, how to not be prey to all their codependent characteristics. The people-pleasing, the caretaking, the blaming, the victimhood, the catastrophizing, on and on. And so it was very fulfilling to try to bring, especially in those last few years, what I learned here in AA. So I retired 4 years ago, and I don't think it will surprise you that my license is still active. I don't want to work in the field of psychiatry. I'm going to make some business cards. I don't even want my credentials on there. My credentials is Sally Isaacson, alcoholic addict. And everything I know about helping and healing, I learned here. Not everything. Some of the things, of course, that I've learned in my career are very helpful. But how to be as a human being, how to be effective, how to be present, how to love unconditionally, that's the greatest joy in the world. And if I needed the money, I might work, but I'm retired. And I have the great pleasure and honor of working with young women who I get to watch them. Some of them are here. I get to watch them open up like a butterfly, come in, these bedraggled, obnoxious little snots, and turn into these beautiful young women that are so loving and kind and learn how to love themselves. It's just, my heart is brimming, with joy. I've been doing that since even before I retired, coffee dates, sponsoring. And when people thank me, I'm like, I get every bit as much out of this as you do. And when my sponsor told me that in the beginning, I was like, oh, yeah, right. I'm just a walking mess, and you're getting as much. But now I understand. It's a totally reciprocal thing. And when people say thank you to me, it's like, well, if I didn't have you, I'd have nothing to do. So I love that we do it because we've been given a gift, and then we're able to pass it along. And there's no greater joy. So there is something I want to talk about. I see I've got about 10 minutes. I want to talk about quantum physics because we have known since 1925 about quantum physics that we are not physical beings. We are energy fields. And this is all documented scientific stuff. It's not my opinion. I had to wait a long time for it to be out there in the scientific world because I knew about it since I was 19. The point of that is that we are so fortunate that Bill and Bob, whether they knew it or not, put quantum physics into the big book. They talked about being rocketed into the fourth dimension. They talked about your thinking being placed on a higher plane. They talked about knowing intuitively how to handle situations. There's many, many more quotes. Unfortunately, I'm not as knowledgeable of the big book, but the point of it is, especially in my lifetime, we were sold a bill of goods that you're supposed to use the mind to figure things out. No, and it took me coming here to figure this out. You can't think your way into right acting. You got to act your way into right thinking. And this program is totally scientific. You do these things, and these things happen. You don't even have to believe in it. I don't know how many old-timers I've heard them say, some of the other old-timers said, I don't care what you think, just get on your knees and pray. I love it, because it's true. It's a blueprint. It's a scientific blueprint. Like I said, whether they knew what they were doing or not, it's all in there. And what do you think that fourth dimension is? That's where you start to realize that you don't do it from here, you do it from here. And as human beings, we are wired with a GPS that we know. I mean, how come dogs can sense if somebody's a good person and we can't? Well, guess what? We can. We just turned it off. And especially with drugs and alcohol. And also our parents, our society told us, no, that's not real. Well, guess what? Turns out it is real. And I can give you names of all the top scientists, neuroscientists, biologists, that have been researching this for many, many decades and have, produced a lot of solid research. The point is that it does work if you work it, and that what you think does matter. And if I think something, my thoughts have energy, and people can feel it. And I've known that for a long time, but I've only really, really trusted it in the last few years. And that's why we try to get impeccable with our speech. That's why we try to get impeccable with the way we behave. Because everything I do affects my energy field. Have you ever heard the word, somebody's on my wavelength? That's not a new expression. And somebody knew what they were talking about. We all vibrate at different frequencies. And these can be photographed and they can be measured. And it's been around for a while now. So I'm not trying to sell you a bunch of scientific stuff. I'm trying to say Bill and Bob simplified it for us so we don't have to be rocket scientists. And if we do certain things, we feel certain things. And then we feel like, oh, I need to do this. And then we do it and we feel good. And when we feel good, then we begin to think, well, every time I trust those feelings and I do these things, I feel good. And that becomes, a self-fulfilling prophecy where we know that our thoughts are important, what we say and what we think. And we come in here with a lot of what we call character defects, which to me are just what we did before we knew better. We grew up in maybe dysfunctional families, in a dysfunctional society. Not just our families, we live in a crazy world, have you noticed? So we have to unlearn a lot of crazy stuff. And what's so cool is that a couple of guys and a few other alcoholics got together over 80 years ago, and they were given this divine blueprint. And I still get chills when I say that, because after all my education and experience, there's nothing that stacks up to this, nothing. And that's why I started by saying I'm a grateful alcoholic. And I think that's enough. So thank you all. I want to say one more thing. A lot of times people will say, I'm not doing anything. I'm not being, like if they're working at Safeway, I'm not important. Or it's like, if you do everything you can to be the best person you can be, you raise your vibration. You also heard of good vibes. You find the winners. The winners are the people that are vibrating where you want to vibrate. And the frequencies where we vibrate the highest are, guess what? Gratitude, kindness, honesty, love. These are the ones that take us to those higher realms. And I can tell you that the way my life is now, I hardly ever have to think. I just know. I just kind of flow along. Like, okay, now I'm doing this. Now I'm doing that. My husband got lymphoma a year ago. It's like, okay, deal with it. Fortunately, he's alive. He's fine. But I was prepared for him to die because I know there's a benevolent God. There's a plan, higher power, if you will, that as long as I do what I need to do, I'm fine. And that is a feeling I waited my whole life to have, and I hope everybody in this room sticks around long enough to get that. So thank you very much.